You'll often come across an anime that gains its popularity solely based on its premise, even if the execution of said premise is a total mess. Bokudake ga Inaimachi or Erased is a good example of such a case. But it's not an irreparable mess like some others. It presents an interesting combination of a murder mystery and time travel, but the execution of these concepts was done poorly. Apart from completely messing up its mystery and supernatural elements, it doesn't even adapt its source material properly. In this multiple part video series, I'll be going over these aspects of Erased that were done poorly and give my interpretation on how they could have been fixed. In this video, I'll cover the mystery aspect. Erased fails as a mystery in almost every conceivable way. The biggest mystery element in the show dies out very quickly because of how painfully obvious the killer was. There's three key reasons for this failure: lack of solid suspects, poor foreshadowing, bad character writing, and the fact that it pretty much gives it away in the opening song. However, this last one was still inconclusive. There's 5 characters the show wants us to think are suspects, and they're Jun Shiratori, Kaio's mother, Takahashi, the manager of the pizza place, Sawada, the reporter, Yashiro, and Kenya to some extent. These become apparent eventually with these shots in the opening song. Out of these, Jun Shiratori is technically ruled out because he was originally falsely accused of being the killer. The whole point of the show was to find the real killer and prove his innocence. It can't logically be Kaio's mother because she had no connection to the 2 other victims. And besides, it's clearly established that the killer was a man. It can't be Takahashi or Sawada either because even they had no connection to any of the kids. Takahashi wasn't even present in the past timeline. Which singles out Yashiro Gaku, someone who had a connection to 2 of the victims and was quite obviously the killer. It really wasn't hard figuring it out within a few episodes. The lack of more solid suspects combined with some really poor foreshadowing helped me and many others figure it out easily. This suspicion gets further strengthened when Satoru deduces in episode 6 that the killer was someone who knew Hiromi was a boy, so that by killing him, he'd keep himself off the list of suspects. It also goes without saying that the killer couldn't be some other random person who wasn't introduced, because in a mystery, a revelation on the part of the detective or the audience works only when it arises from information already known. There was potential for multiple, equally suspicious suspects. We could have had the kids interact with more than just their homeroom teacher, like their principal, another teacher in their school, or perhaps another character in the form of a teacher of the cram school that Nakanishi Aya, one of the victims, attended, and have our protagonists attend that cram school as well. This way we could have had a character that interacts with all 3 of the victims, thereby making Yashiro's reveal as the killer actually shocking, for both the viewer and Satoru. An alternative would be to take an entirely different approach and make it obvious right from the beginning that Yashiro is the killer, but I'll address this point once I'm done talking about the issues with the foreshadowing. The way in which the show gets us to suspect Yashiro is done almost amateurishly. The foreshadowing in the show was blatant, making use of low camera angles to show dominance, cuts where his face is kept in the dark behind shadows, giving him the occasional creepy face that serves no purpose other than to make him look more suspicious, and then this scene that pretty much confirms it.
なんかはみ出てるよ。
サトル、そこは触っちゃ。
ごめんな。これは。
Of course, I can't really give a good fix for how the foreshadowing should have been carried out in Erased, but instead, I'll give an example of how foreshadowing can be done better and how it should be done. Let's take a look at Detective Conan, another show that revolves around a protagonist who, after having reverted back to a child, solves mysteries. Detective Conan, however, goes about foreshadowing in a much more subtle and nuanced manner. Instead of using cheap visual tricks to bring about suspicion, Detective Conan creates situations where the characters make contradictory statements, do something out of character, have a minor change in appearance before and after the crime, etc. But all of this is done so subtly that the viewer won't be able to pick it up unless they're really paying close attention to detail. To help understand my point better, I'll give a few examples of the subtle foreshadowing. My first example is from the 6th movie of Detective Conan, The Phantom of Baker Street. I'll briefly explain the setup so you understand the context. Conan and 49 other kids are stuck in a VR game, and if they die in the game, they die in real life. Later on during the game, a kid in Conan's group points out something weird about a clock. Here's the scene.
Check it out. Something about that clock seems weird.
It's moving backwards.
The clock ticking backwards is basically a sort of countdown to the number of kids left in the game. Now here's the subtle giveaway.
Look, it did it again!
From 50 minutes to 49 minutes. And then down to 48.
At first glance, this seems like any regular scene, but only if you're paying close attention to detail will you see what's suspicious. Let's listen to what they say again.
If it just went back 2 minutes...
That must mean 2 kids in another stage have been knocked out of the game.
Alright, so we know there are 50 kids inside the game in total, and 2 kids just got knocked out, which made the clock move from the 50th minute to the 48th minute. But what's suspicious here is that the kid pointed out that something about it is weird before it had even started moving backward. And then later on, there's another incident of this character saying something that arouses suspicion. Early on in the movie, it gets established that this character and his friends love football. Keeping that in mind, take a look at this scene.
What's with this filthy ball? No way. Yo, check it. This soccer ball is like 100 years old.
Whoa, that's cool.
The giveaway here is the fact that his reaction is completely opposite to that of his friends, which is uncharacteristic of a football fan. What makes this sort of foreshadowing so good is that these incidents don't outright give away the mystery, like Erased lollipop scene, but instead subtly clues the audience into it. In this movie's case, this character comes off as mildly suspicious due to these 2 incidents, but doesn't outright reveal anything else. This helps keep the mystery intact right till the end and forces the viewer to pay attention and think. When this calculated guess turns out correct, the payoff is mind-blowing. These were 2 examples of foreshadowing through dialogue. Here's an example of visual foreshadowing. This one's not as subtle, but it's still far better than what Erased tried to pull off. It's from episode 33 of Detective Conan, Murder at the Local Diner. All 4 suspects get a short introduction before the murder occurs. Here's what the first few lines of dialogue are from the real culprit.
How's it going?
Not bad, James. Say, what happened to your finger there?
Oh, this? It's nothing. I jammed it during rugby practice. Made the wife mad because now I can't fit my wedding ring on.
Alright, now have a look at this scene after the murder where he's being questioned.
I guess I was after her then. I come here just about every day, you know. The owner and I are real good buddies.
Did you notice it? If you didn't, it's his finger bandage. It's on his middle finger instead of his ring finger. He ended up tying it on the wrong finger in a hurry. This isn't very easy to pick up either unless you're really paying close attention to everything. This sort of visual foreshadowing is far better as it's not deceiving the audience with pretentious visual tricks like using red eyes for possible suspects and making them seem evil. It's quite shameful when a show targeted towards teenagers and children is smarter than a show targeted towards an audience of above 17. And while I'm at it, the argument that Erased is actually a thriller and not a mystery is completely false. Erased was clearly trying to be a mystery because the show itself was actively trying its best to present certain other people as evil or suspicious, which is evident with its use of red eyes. I mean, oh god, it's clearly trying so hard. Take a look at this. Why did they even put this in? They are literally deceiving the audience by doing something like this. That wouldn't have been the case if we actually had some sort of payoff for this scene. Perhaps by having Kenya be Yashiro's accomplice and a time traveler similar to Satoru. Something like this would have made things so much more interesting, and even justified Kenya's smartness, which is uncharacteristic of a kid his age. There's so many interesting possibilities, but they chose a very lazy route. Now, to get back to my point of the show taking a different approach by blatantly making the killer's identity obvious from the very beginning. And this can be done while still maintaining a mystery. The mystery being how the killer was even able to commit the crimes. This can be facilitated by creating a rock-solid alibi for the killer, and the main reveal being the killer's elaborate plan to carry out the murders while still maintaining his alibi. Unfortunately, there's absolutely nothing interesting about the way Yashiro carries out his murders. He just kidnaps them and then kills them, and we don't even get to see any interesting scheming on his part. To give you a better example of what I mean by interesting methods of murder, I'll provide another short example, again from Detective Conan, where there's often cases where the killer is revealed to us at the beginning itself, and the mystery is figuring out how he or she did it. Episode 86 of Conan features a case where the killer frames someone by luring him into a vacant room for 3 continuous nights by making it look as if a murder was taking place in that particular room, while the killer was actually enacting a murder with the help of a CPR dummy in a storage room, and made it look as if it was happening in that vacant room by using windows as a reflective mirror. Then on the 4th night, the murder actually took place in that vacant room where the person being framed came once more but was knocked out, after which the killer wrapped his hands around the knife to leave his prints and thereby frame him. He created his alibi by having a nurse bring coffee to his office and speak to her by calling his office phone and setting it on speaker beforehand. With such an elaborate plan, not only is the mystery made very engaging, but the payoff makes it worth every second of it. Another reason Erase fails as a mystery is the bad character writing. A mystery should involve the viewer and invite them to solve the mystery alongside the detective. For the mystery aspect of a show to be engaging, it really helps if the protagonist is proactive and actively searches for clues to solve the mystery. In this case, find the killer. But instead, Satoru does everything but that. He thinks saving Kaio from the killer will somehow prevent his mother from getting killed? But that makes no sense, because that still doesn't assure his mother's safety from the killer in the future. The most simple and logical solution was to find out the identity of the killer by looking for clues. But nope, he just reacts according to the given situations. He's basically a plot device. All he does is protect Kaio and the other children from dying, as if the killer can't just choose other children to kill. His reasoning makes absolutely no sense. Satoru actually had many opportunities to find him out. He could have baited the killer and ambushed him, especially since he knew his targets, or secretly tailed the targets to see who kidnaps them. There's a million things he could have done. There could have been situations where the killer read through Satoru's ambush and prepared counter plans, which could have possibly created interesting mind games. But nope, none of that either. So the obvious fix for this would be to make Satoru a more proactive protagonist in the ways I just mentioned. Another weak aspect of the character writing in my opinion is the villain Yashiro, who's especially weaker in the anime. The manga has an entire chapter dedicated to his flashback where we get a whole lot on Yashiro's character that I wouldn't want to spoil. Just go read it, it's chapter 32. So before reading that chapter, I would have asked for a conventionally better written villain, who would have a good backstory with solid motives, etc, etc. And while the manga doesn't really provide that either, it does make Yashiro a slightly unique villain, especially with them going into detail about the spider's thread analogy. So my fix for Yashiro would be to just add in his backstory. I'll talk about this in more detail in the third part of this video series. And that's about it. To sum it all up, the show requires more solid suspects, subtle and not blatant foreshadowing, making Satoru a proactive and smarter protagonist, and by smart I mean just a basic level of smart, and either making Yashiro a conventionally well written villain or just adding in his entire backstory from the manga. Part 2 of this video series will focus on the issues with the time travel aspects, and part 3 will be about how it could have been better adapted, as well as my interpretation on how the show could have been better structured episode by episode, given the limited space to adapt a comparatively larger source material. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.